This poem is called All That Wasted Dead Space. I'm driving on Interstate 90 when a semi starts to pass. On its gray box, a picture of a pine tree and the words, Batesville Casket Company, committed to the dignity of life. Reminded of the Bates Motel in Hitchcock's movie Psycho, I feel I'm on the road with death and its cargo. A stack of caskets like bales of hay, but awful in their emptiness, going to be filled. The wasted space should be used to haul the products of life. Caskets filled with soap, breakfast cereal, computers, seed corn, and garden tools. Think of the satisfaction for the trucker, delivering goods for the living, and afterwards he could swing by the funeral home and leave the shipping containers. Caskets as shipping containers. How about that? Hop in, we'll have you home in no time. The gift of the artist, the poet, the musician, the painter, is often to take something we see one way and to recast it so we see it differently. So it, in a sense, has new life. And then, having taken it in, we watch and see how it maybe rearranges things inside of us. In a world where survival is always tenuous, where there is an army of enemies ready to end your life at any moment, if you get out of line, Jesus is the artist. He's the poet who recasts reality. When he says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. Now, can you imagine what that sounded like to the ears of the people who heard that the first time, who gathered around him in that world in that time? It's a stretch for us because it's such a foreign world. You're occupied. Your life is always hanging by a thread because you have little or nothing and because this army will take your life from you. And he says this, love your enemies. Do good to those who curse you. Bless those who curse. What's going on? We've talked about the overturning theme in Luke, where the mighty are brought down from their thrones and the lowly are lifted up. The poor are filled with good things and the rich are sent empty away, that recurring theme of overturning. Well, that begins not out there, but it begins in here, I think. So Jesus goes on. He says, if somebody smacks you across the face to put you in your place, presumably that's what's going on, and there's a power differential. And how it works is they backhand you across the face, and it catches you on the right side of your face. And this is between two males, one who has power and one who has none. And the one who has none has displeased the one who has the power. So smack. When they do that to you to put you in your place, do not cower, but stand up straight and turn your face and invite them to hit you on the other side because they can't. They can't do with that way. They either have to slap you, can't use the left hand because that's not used for such things. We won't talk about that. In that culture, it's used for other things. But a male will not slap another male. Maybe he'll slap a woman or a child in that culture. But in that case, the only way you can be punished if you've turned the other cheek is if he hits you with a closed fist. And suddenly, the power differential has shifted. That's what he's talking about, at least according to Walter Wink. So, turn the other cheek, strategically. And if you go to a payday lender because you can't make ends meet because you need some money now, and they lend you the money, but then they take your coat away from you as collateral, and that coat is what keeps the weather off you, it's what keeps you warm, and it's what you sleep in often. If they do that, then take off your shirt and give it to them as well, because those are the two garments that you have. That's all. And stand there naked before him and shame him before the world, because what he is doing is shameful. It was then and it is now. It's wrong. And if somebody comes and begs from you, you who have next to nothing, well, you know they're desperate. So give what you can, because they may not survive otherwise. And who knows, it might be you tomorrow that is begging. And by doing that, you begin to create a community of trust and compassion where you look out for one another, and that changes things. That's different than what is going on now. In other words, Jesus says, do towards others, behave, act towards others the way you would want them to act and behave and do towards you. But do so without expecting anything in return. Why? Because that's God's way. You're the people of God. The new world of God is woven into you, seeking to emerge. And then Jesus goes on to contrast the now and the new. He says, now you love those who love you, right? Of course. And you lend or give to those who you know will repay you, or you're pretty sure they will. And you do good things to those who will do good things to you in return, who will reciprocate. So what? What difference does that make? That simply further solidifies what is. And the question, the way it's termed in the NRSV is, what credit is that to you? And the word credit is a strange translation of the word charis, which is grace. Where is the grace in that? If you give to those who will give back to you, where's the grace in that? If you love those who love you, where's the grace in that? No. More is expected of us. You are to be merciful, to be generous, to be gracious, to be big-hearted and giving, because that's the way of God, because that brings the light of God out into the world, that light that is already within you. Let it shine forth. Don't hide it. Let it shine. And that light will be reflected back to you in ways, at times, in places you do not expect. Now, did any of you notice how Jesus began this section, or how Luke begins this section through Jesus? What he says? He says, but I say to you that listen. But I say to you that listen. He's already talked about what this new realm looks like, where the poor are lifted up and those who are powerful are put in their place. But I say to those of you that listen, do good, bless those who curse you, love your enemies, all of that. We find the truth that is to be lived out there as we listen deep within here. It starts within. To find that deeper identity, that deeper reality, that inner teacher, that voice that is woven into us, that we are given from before our beginning. That expression of God's own self that we carry. But I say to you that listen. So see if this rings a bell at all, if you've heard anything like this. A radically welcoming community of lifelong learners who celebrate life in every facet. A radically welcoming community of lifelong learners who celebrate life in every facet. Does that sound familiar at all? That's the new vision statement for Spirit of Hope. That is what has emerged from a group of people beginning almost a year ago now, in which we're now going to try to figure out, well, what does that look like as we live it out? That's how we envision this community being. A radically welcoming community of lifelong learners who celebrate every facet of life. what does that look like then, specifically in the everyday? What does that look like? How is that realized in our everyday life as individuals and a community? You've heard it before. We create the world we live in by the way we live in the world. We create the world we live in by the way we live in the world. So, Jimmy was alienated from pretty much everybody around him, from his family. He was angry, he was violent, he was rebellious. And after a blow-up with his family, he leaves. And he heads south, and he gets as far south and east as the little bit of money he has will take him, and he lands in Tallahassee, Florida, of all places. And there he finds a group of young men like himself, who wear the same uniform and have the same attitude, the combat fatigues, the combat boots, the shaved head, the tattoos of swastikas, and other racist sayings and symbols, hateful things. They're white supremacists, skinhead, neo-Nazis, whatever you want to call them. And he wants to join them, and they have some tests for him, and he passes their tests, so he joins them. And then he joins in their ugly, violent, chaotic behavior as they terrorize people of color, as they assault young, vulnerable black men, as they break into places, as they just are jerks. Just jerks. And he's with them for a couple, 3 weeks maybe, and then he gets in a fight with the leader. And he's kicked out of this gang. So now he's all by himself. He has no one to fall back on, no place to go, no resources, nothing. But he does have an awful lot of people who want to do unto him as he has done unto them, if they have the chance. So he's at great risk. So he, at night, sneaks around and finds this shed behind this school that's on the other side of the railroad tracks, and it's kind of tucked back in a little patch of woods. And the shed seems unused and it's unlocked. So he goes inside. This is wintertime. It's Florida, panhandle, but it's wintertime. And he's exhausted and he's hungry. And he's cold. And so he huddles in the corner of this shed, and he wraps around him whatever is there, some plastic bags and some cardboard, and he goes to sleep eventually. He wakes up and he smells food cooking. And there's a blanket over him and a pillow beside him. He didn't have a blanket. He didn't have a pillow. And his mouth is watering immediately, smelling the food. And so he gets up and he goes outside the shed, and he sees opposite of the direction he came, there's a little house that he didn't see in the dark. And between him and the house, there's this man cooking over an open fire in what must be his backyard. And maybe this man owns this shed. He doesn't know. And the guy simply calls out, "Plenty of food if you're hungry." And he doesn't want to go and take this man's food. The man is black. But he is so hungry. And he has nothing else. He has no other options. So he goes and sits down by the fire and eats with this black man. And they sit in silence. And eventually, the man whose name is Silas tells him, "You can camp out in the shed as long as you need to. I'll bring more bedding and some food that you don't need to cook. You can come in to the house. You can use the kitchen, use the bathroom, as long as you need." That's all that's said. And Jimmy doesn't want to do it, but he doesn't have anything else to fall back on. So he stays, and he's there for a week. He's there for a second week. And one evening, as they're sitting by the fire, he asks Silas, "Why are you doing this for me? Why are you treating me this way? I do not deserve this." And you know I wouldn't have been caught dead with you 3 weeks ago, and I might have wanted you dead, and I might have tried to get you there. Silas says, I know. He says, it's not about deserving or liking or agreeing with somebody. He explains to him that he's Muslim and that this action is part of living out his faith. Because it's deeper than what people deserve, and it's deeper than agreeing or liking or getting along with even. But I say to you that, listen, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who would harm you or abuse you. Because that's the way of God, and you're the people of God. The truth of God, the reality of God, the Spirit of God, the life of God, the light of God is woven inside of you, and the world needs to see it. And we do create the world we live in by the way we live in the world. So a sort of a relationship develops between these two. And Silas gets Jimmy some other clothes that help cover up the tattoos, and a hat, so he's not quite so conspicuous. And then he helps Jimmy get in touch with his family. And there's a conversation with some confessions and some apologies back and forth. And Jimmy's dad invites him to come home because they've been worried about him. And so they make arrangements so Jimmy can get home. And this story then is carried on a local small TV station some weeks later, and someone from the Southern Poverty Law Center sees it or hears of it, and they contact Jimmy and ask him if he would allow them to interview him because they would like to share his story with their readers and their supporters. And he said sure, he would do that. Maybe it would help somebody else like him. Maybe it would make a difference. And maybe he hoped maybe Silas would see it, would read it, and then see that light reflected back on him that had shone in him. Now, I don't know if Silas ever did, but now you have. So what difference will that make in you? And what difference will it make in the world that you are creating right now with your life? Amen.